emergency is an event or situation that threatens safety, security, or viability. Can be of an individual, group, an organization, but basically it calls for an immediate response that you have to do something, stop it or mitigate it somehow. A crisis is the period of instability that follows the emergency itself. Need to be physical, mental, spiritual, or emotional needs addressed during this time. And crises can be very life-changing events. So do those two terms make sense?
They do, yeah.
Okay. So the purpose in an emergency or a crisis is obviously protect life and limb. So that's first. Then we care for the people affected by the event, protect property, resources, and mission. Communicate information to the extent that would need to be done, and try to ensure that people are self-sufficient for at least a minimal period of time. We can't do everything, but at least 24 to 72 hours. And then continue our mission and services. And we might need to consider alternate locations or going back to online. Going into a timeline of what that might look like. Preparation periods when there's no emergency or crisis on the horizon. Everything's kind of going. We can use that time to plan, to build resources, to identify people, all of those kind of things. But then you move into a pending crisis. If we have notice of a crisis, like a weather event where you get notice, and in those cases, the event is looming, and sometimes we have an indicator of how long. Sometimes they're right, sometimes they're not, but we get a chance to review our plan, our staff, make sure things are kind of final preparations are in order. Then there's the emergency, the event itself. It happens, it's in progress. During that time, we would, if necessary, notify first responders, get people to safety who respond to anything unforeseen that happens.
Okay.
And then after the event concludes or is winding down, we would go into triage. Basically assessing needs of different people, seeing what happened. But hopefully we have a reunification plan, points of contact for people, for all of our folks who are, at least are regulars. So we can reunite people as necessary, especially kids.
Right, yeah, absolutely.
And maybe, eventually, a communications plan for if we need to deal with the general public or the media in some way. Then the recovery. The event's basically stabilized, people are moving back to whatever normal looks like at that point, moving back to normal. And then we would deal with, okay, so did someone have an extraordinary response? Maybe it triggered something in their past or whatever that was, where they would need referral for ongoing care. Probably want to look at establishing a team. And we've talked about some possibilities, but we'd want to look at specific team members for specific functions.
Right.
And I've given a list of what those might look like in the
And I see
plan before you.
points of contact in these areas of specialization would be things like nurses or
Mental health professionals, counselors, folks taught to deal with people in trauma, all of those kinds of things.
Yeah. And we can do some discerning about whose gifts best fit in those roles and who can best serve on the team.
Yes.
Perfect.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then there's an emergency phone list. Prince William County has an extraordinary amount of resources as like a suicide prevention line, a veterans crisis line, all of those kind of things.
That's great.
Some of the emergency information that I don't know that we have on hand that we might want to gather, like the building plan. I don't know that maybe the usher team needs to know where the building plan is, for example. I don't know our fire evacuation routes, assembly areas, and the shelter-in-place areas identified and posted.
I do know where the building plan is.
Okay.
And we're working on getting all that digitized. We have all this stuff on paper and we're trying to get it scanned and digitized so that we have a record of it there as well. And those have not been updated in a long time.
Okay.
And I think they just show the fire exits. There's no information about like where should you go once you exit the building, which is important, especially up top here where we have this narrow driveway.
Yes.
Yeah, we don't want to be in the way.
Right.
If we need first responders in and out.
Right.
So that's definitely something we should put into place.
Activities like the scouting activities here afterwards, we might wanna think about that as well. Can like plot the route to the nearest fire station, if we were to have to transport someone ourselves in the unlikely event that it were a mass event where every first responder is out, that might be handy to do. Cut off information for water and electric and all of that, going from crisis to recovery. The insurance company, the lawyer, the church district superintendent might or might not be toward the end there.
Right.
I'm presuming he or she's the one you would call.
She I would call like first. Each district has an emergency response team and has a trailer with supplies, and so to call her would mobilize all sorts of resources, which would be really helpful.
I came up with two different types of church emergencies to help us think through that a little bit. Church-centric and church-affected. So church-centric would be those that affect our local community of the church here at this location. Church-affected would be those that affect anyone online who might worship with us, as well as anyone in the larger Prince William County community. Church, and it's kind of a judgment call whether you include church-centric as those that we serve in mission, or those who are involved in our mission who might not be regular worshipers here. So doesn't really matter. The point is to think through how we would serve all of those different populations in a crisis or an emergency.
And it's good to have this conversation now, since that's so new to us, to have this online worshiping community.
For church-centric emergencies, there are usually a couple of responses. They're either evacuate or shelter in place. And excuse me, the wrinkle in that is kind of the active shooter event, which the first response is escape if you can do so safely, but the second response is shelter in place and hide, and the third response only if there are no other options and life is threatened, to consider how to fight back.
It's a very particular sort of situation.
Yes. So basically, in the event of an emergency, the person who is the emergency coordinator, who we would have designated prior, would call 911. I mean, first get yourself to a safe place, then call 911 if it's that type of emergency, or assess what type of emergency it is. And hopefully the emergency team members that we will have identified can assist others to get to a safe place, be that evacuate or shelter. We would have identified ahead of time what individuals would do in that case. Basically, if folks were mostly off-site when an emergency happened on-site, there would also need to be an emergency response called, like if the building flooded or something and help was needed. So there's that kind of stuff. And then there's some special populations that we would need to hopefully prepare for in advance, like have extra formula on hand. We would want extra diapers, playpen, crib, wipes, blankets, all those toys, distractions. Everybody's gonna need a distraction, all age groups. Children, especially the younger ones, will need toys and activities, specialized snacks for them to make them feel special, maybe even some clothes, and definitely some blankets. Teenagers, adults, we're gonna need outlets, power strips, if there's power available. And I don't know if we have the desire to purchase any kind of backup power, at least for the phone chargers of the emergency team, maybe.
For those individuals, if nothing else, so that there's some way to contact outside help. Yeah, absolutely.
And senior citizens are gonna need some specialized care as well, a wheelchair maybe, some measures to amplify sound, because some of them have difficulty hearing. We may have some individuals who are challenged with sight as well, So we'll need to be mindful of that and designate some
Right.
people to watch out for those people and make sure they're shepherded to a safe area.
Yeah.
Crisis is more a trauma event.
Mhm.
And I know that you in particular have dealt with many different types of traumas from your chaplaincy experience and all of that, but not everyone has. So it might be worth it to have the ABC model of make sure you establish rapport with those people who are experiencing a crisis, and assess what their perception of the event is, and what the worst part is for them. Into, so what's the plan of attack? What are we going to do about this? Who would be best suited to do that? Whether it's yourself conducting a small series of office visits, or on a limited basis. I know you don't do that on a long-term basis, or referral to a counselor.
And hearing you talk about that, it would be interesting to think of what it looks like to train lay leadership and the church council members, that as leaders in the church, to have the basic skills to do some trauma-informed conversation and empathy, and just to have a team who's ready to handle that in a way that they know how to refer and who to refer and how to have these conversations. Because if there's a big event and we have multiple people who need that care, having a team of people able to, at the very least, direct folks in the right direction, to listen and be empathetic, and that would be really helpful. Yeah.
We can do some more research, but I'm aware of 3 different things that I personally have been part of that helps with those kind of things. The Trauma Healing Institute has a healing class or healing group, I think they call it, and they do encourage churches to send people to be facilitators for those kind of things, and they teach you 3 questions to ask for a trauma. What happened, what was the worst part, and how did it make you feel? I think I reversed the order on the last 2 of those, but you get the idea. But it basically teaches you how to talk to people in trauma and what kind of responses to expect of them. Then there's Grief Share that you and I intended to start.
Yes.
And then there's Stephen Ministry, which is more one-on-one.
But yeah, gathering that information, filling in those blanks, making sure we have the denominational resources and the local resources and the church-specific resources there. And I think in terms of putting together the team, we'd probably want to do some discernment work around that, around gifts and graces and folks who may be called to serve in that way. And then I think at that point we'd probably want to get the team together and have a meeting and sort of go over everything again.
I'm thinking, I wonder if it's actually 2 teams. If it's an emergency team and a more crisis team. Because crises can be personal things also, like I'm going through a divorce, my child threatened suicide, now what? I mean, crises can be the more one-on-one kind of thing in addition to the community events.
Right.
So, I don't know.
Well, right. And it may be that the emergency team sort of oversees everything, but their gifts may be different than those who might be called to do something like the Stephen Minister training or doing some of this trauma healing training to do that work with folks. And so it may be that the emergency team is in a supervisory role over a collection of lay folks who feel called to that sort of caring ministry. And so the emergency team could do that discernment work and invite folks into that role.
And we could, thinking out loud here, we could focus on a particular type of crisis a month or every couple of months or so. Like, okay, let's make sure we've got this fire thing down.
Right.
We'll also, if we're thinking of multiple teams, to have that camaraderie and make sure the team is cared for as well.
Yes, absolutely. It makes me that we should probably update our own records about contact with church folks,
Mhm.
just because in the midst of this pandemic, people have moved and people have gone and people have come, and people may have changed information, and so it might be important for us to go through that and to think about how we, in thinking about this wider range of people because of our online worshiping community, what does it look like for us to have contact information for them? And that may look very different from our sort of traditional, here's a book with names and addresses and phone numbers.
Right.
You know, is it some sort of computer-based resource that has their social media information, if they're engaging through the Facebook page?
And oh my gosh,
At their contact.
if there's no electricity where they are,
Right.
how do we make
get in
sure
touch?
they're
How do we
okay?
take care? Yeah.
Yeah.
And contact information for the teens and kids.
Mhm.
Oftentimes they don't get included
Right.
in those books,
Right.
which makes sense. You may not want your child's information out there,
Exactly.
but your child may have a phone for emergencies.
Also good to have a couple of different points of contact for children. If someone's in a meeting, turn their phone off.
Right.
What do you do if there's an emergency with a child? Yeah. So.
And we do, yes. I'll have to look at, so we have the Safe Sanctuary policy, which is about sort of protecting children and vulnerable individuals sort of in the moment at church events, at church functions here in the building. And I'm wondering if that has any information about how do we go about contacting parents if there's an emergency that's affected us here, if we're having a youth event and the youth are all here and the parents are out, does that policy have anything in it about contacting and reaching out? I'll have to go back and read that.
The other side of it is we have some vulnerable kids as well. Have we informed them to contact us if their child were to wander away? So we could be a support for them. And I was excited in that resource plan to find a program by the Sheriff's Department that actually has some tags they put on kids to help them be located if they are autistic or something like that and wander away. Now, getting the child to where, it's a different story, but
Right.
at least the resource is there. So there is that. Is there anything else you can think of? Or any questions you have?
This has been really clear, and I think a lot of this next steps involve sort of putting together that team and having some conversations with them about the specific details. I think some of the resources we're definitely going to want to look into are our neighbors.
Yes.
There's the Catholic Church across the street and the mosque down the road, and we may want to look into ways that we can collaborate with them, work with them. If it's a disaster or emergency in our area, that would be good to know in terms of our resources and ways that we could team together with our neighbors.
I think that might be a discussion with those. I did go over to the Catholic Church and talk to their outreach minister, and she has not gotten back to me, but there are those kind of connections. Even the Jewish community is a little further away, but also other denominational resources in the area as well. So there's that. And then we have the parking lot up here with all the businesses.
Right.
So I don't know what their plans might entail.
That's
But
a
we
good
have
question.
partnerships with the grocery store at least.
Right.
So for some of our food ministries, so it might be good to just kind of say, hey, do you have an emergency plan? What does it look like?
Right.
Okay.
So great things to follow up on.
All right.
This is excellent. Thank you.
Thank you.